The Von Erichs are a legendary wrestling family that is most likely known for their tragic history. Whether you're still around from the second generation era or a new age wrestling fan, you've seen their induction into the WWE Hall of Fame, you probably watched their episode of The Dark Side of the Ring, and recently you caught that biopic depicting some of what happened in this family's legacy. Some, but not all. This is an examination of the story portrayed in The Iron Claw and how much it gets right about the real lives of the Von Erichs. This video will go into touchy details regarding what you might not know about the Von Erich family history. Some things might be hard to hear. Disclaimer: I do not own the rights of any of the videos, images, or sounds other than my own voice that will be portrayed in this video. Everything you will see is for documentary purposes only and is protected under the Fair Use Act of 1976. The Von Erichs is a family of professional wrestlers that spans 3 generations, starting with Jack Atkinson, going by his ring name Fritz Von Erich. He debuted in professional wrestling in 1953 along with his tag partner Waldo Von Erich as his pseudo-brother. Waldo's real name was Walter Seiber, and he is no relation to the Atkinson family. This is not an uncommon wrestling trope, but of course there are actual related families in wrestling. The pair were teamed up as Nazi brothers that worked the heel angle in their matches, which was set up by the legendary Stu Hart, the father to the historical Hart family consisting of 12 children, including Bret and Owen Hart. This wasn't the only time someone used the Von Erich name who wasn't a direct member of the family. In the episode of Dark Side of the Ring, they discuss Lance Von Erich, real name Ricky Vaughn. He was a replacement to David, which Kevin and Kerry were against from the beginning.
It was a terrible idea. We had never lied to our people. Lance.
Despite the storyline that Lance was the son of Waldo, Ricky wasn't related to Walter Seiber either. Another Texas-found wrestling organization, Global Wrestling Federation, had a competitor on their roster going by the name Mark Von Erich. His backstory was that he was the illegitimate son of Fritz Von Erich. Safe to say, the GWF went out of business 3 years later, and Mark went along with it.
It's headed up by superstar Mark Von Erich.
Tell you what, Rusty, I'm very excited about this program.
Jack married Doris Smith in 1950. They welcomed the first member of their family on September 21st, 1952. Jack Jr. was the firstborn Von Erich child. While touring in Niagara Falls, Jack Jr. would suffer a terrible accident, which the film touches on, but doesn't go deep into what actually happened. On March 7th, 1959, Jack Jr. stepped on the tow hitch of a train, which he received an electric shock and fainted. Sadly, he fell face first into a puddle of water and drowned. This would be the incident that set the foundation for why most would consider the Von Erichs to be the most cursed family in professional wrestling history. Before Jack Jr.'s death, the Von Erichs welcomed 2 more boys into their family. Kevin was born on May 15, 1957, and David was born on July 22, 1958. Shortly after Jack Jr.'s accident, the family welcomed Kerry, who was born on February 3, 1960. Michael, the 5th Von Erich boy, was born on March 2, 1964. Jack Sr. continued his wrestling career, opening up his own promotion in 1966, World Class Championship Wrestling, over in Texas. Considered to be a subnet of the NWA, it was a prime location for the Von Erich family to make a name for themselves. The Von Erich name to this day is synonymous with Texas. A fact the film doesn't include is that there weren't 5 Von Erich boys. There were 6. On September 30th, 1969, the Von Erichs welcomed Chris Von Erich. Chris was the only child born with medical issues. He was diagnosed with asthma, meaning he could not train as hard as his brothers did. He wouldn't grow to the same stature of the rest of his brothers either. Where they all stretched over 6 feet tall, Chris came in at about 5'5". The doctors said he had extremely fragile bones, which would be prone to easy breaks. That didn't stop him from joining the family business when he was of age. He suffered many injuries in his attempts to follow his brothers into the wrestling world, but he could not establish himself as he was not as athletic. He managed to have one consistent feud with William Moody, wrestling under the name Percy Pringle, a character used in the NWA. Moody would eventually lead his career into the WWF as the legendary manager to The Undertaker, Paul Bearer. Chris, however, became depressed that he could not succeed with the family to continue on the great name of the Von Erichs. In 1991, 18 days before his 22nd birthday, Chris shot himself in the head. Reports indicated that he did have drugs in his system, and it was known that after the death of his brother Mike, he had grown an addiction which might have added to the suicidal thoughts he couldn't get rid of. Kevin discovered his body moments after it had happened. His story is one the film leaves out completely. Writer and director Sean Durkin stated in an interview it was one more tragedy that the film couldn't withstand as his decision to leave out Chris's story entirely. However, his initial script did include Chris at the beginning. Quote, "When you're trying to get a film made, you have to separate it at some point and say, these are characters on a page, and this is a film. And there's no way you're going to fully capture the life of a person in a film. You have to make difficult choices to try and get to something truthful, or representative, or emotional that reflects the core of the journey you're choosing to tell within this family." With that being said, what about the fates of the other brothers? The story the film does portray. How much of their story is fully told? David Von Erich is portrayed by Harris Dickinson. At this point in his career, probably best known for his role in Where the Crawdad Sings, Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and The Kingsman, David debuted in the ring June 28, 1977. He had many bouts with Harley Race and Ric Flair, while also teaming up with his brother Kerry against the Fabulous Freebirds. One thing the film does capture is how good David was on the mic. He was known for having a personality that made his promos memorable and entertaining.
With his own two hands, the hands that were passed down to us, the hands that will deliver the iron claw to you.
A major detail the film leaves out is that David was married. Not once, but twice. His first marriage was to Candy McLeod, June 1978. The couple welcomed their daughter Natasha in October of that same year. Sadly, the baby died of SIDS at 13 weeks. David and Candy would divorce in June of 1979. In 1982, David married Patricia Matter, and they remained together until his death on February 10, 1984. Like in the film, this does happen in Japan, but the cause that the movie states is that he died from a ruptured intestine.
What happened? He died in his hotel room in Japan. A ruptured intestine.
The actual reports indicate that he died from an acute enteritis. However, many believe it was far more serious than that. Rumors state that David died from a drug overdose, and the drugs themselves were disposed of by fellow wrestler Bruiser Brody, who discovered David's body. Ric Flair has mentioned in his autobiography that everyone in wrestling believes this to be true. Legendary wrestler Mick Foley has also spoken out about his beliefs that it was an overdose. A tribute show was held in his honor, where Kerry Von Erich would win the NWA World Heavyweight title.
Cross, Kerry across. Kerry's got it. Here's the Nelson pin. 2, 3. The dreams come true. Yes.
Kerry is the only Von Erich to hold this title ever. Kerry Von Erich is portrayed by Jeremy Allen White, best known as Lip Gallagher from Shameless, or Chef Carmine Berzato in The Bear. Kerry is considered the most popular of the Von Erich family. His athleticism was unlike a wrestler of his stature. Though he is portrayed by 5'7" Jeremy, Kerry was actually over 6 feet tall, just like the rest of his family. His build also helped him in the Olympics, as he held a record-breaking discus throw and was meant to attend the 1980 Summer Games. But then President Jimmy Carter issued the boycott on the Olympics, and Kerry returned home and continued his wrestling career. Most of this we see in the film. So what don't we see? Well, like his brother David, Kerry was also married. On June 18, 1983, Kerry married Catherine Murray. They would have 2 daughters together. Holly Brooke, born September 19, 1984, and Lacey Dawn, born July 17, 1986. Something the film does get right is that on June 4, 1986, Kerry was involved in a motorcycle accident, which resulted in the loss of his right foot. However, Kerry continued to wrestle with a fake foot and kept it a secret from fans and fellow wrestlers. However, the only wrestler to ever mention that they knew about the foot was Roddy Piper.
I'm in the Marriott in Miami on the 8th story with Kevin Von Erich. He used to like to room with me. For some reason, it didn't bother him to take off his prosthetic. He was a great guy.
One thing the film touches on, but doesn't go deep into, is that Kerry also develops an addiction to painkillers around this time. The pain he went through from wrestling with an amputated foot would lead him down this path, where it also led him into other drug problems, as well as being arrested twice. This took its toll on his marriage, and Catherine would divorce Kerry in April 1992. Bret Hart has stated in his autobiography that it was around this time in Kerry's life that he went to Bret and confided in him his suicidal thoughts. Kerry wanted to join his brothers. On February 18, 1993, Kerry Von Erich shot himself in the heart on his father's ranch in Texas. The youngest Von Erich the film does portray is Michael, played by Stanley Simmons as his 3rd feature film ever. It tells the story of Michael not being the most athletic, but accepting it. He sees his strength as his music being his art and expression. This is true of Michael in real life, as he was always enthusiastic about working for his family company, but never cared about wrestling. Whether it was his father who pushed him to join his brothers in the ring or not, he had his first match in 1983 and continued his career up until his death. Michael was also married in 1985 to Shani Garza, but the film depicts him as being awkward and shy and never really trying to be in a relationship. On August 22, 1985, Michael would suffer a shoulder injury while on a wrestling tour in Israel. This would result in surgery where he would suffer a staph infection that escalated into toxic shock syndrome. He would then develop an extremely high fever and suffered brain damage at the same time. While attempting to continue with his life, he was in a car accident in 1985, suffering further head injuries. Later, it was discovered that the car accident wasn't an accident at all, but Michael did it intentionally. He was later arrested for drunk driving and possession of marijuana. The night after his release from jail, Mike would disappear. On April 12, 1987, Michael took an excessive amount of sleep aids while drinking and wandered out into the Louisville Lake. His body was found 4 days later. Kevin Von Erich is portrayed by Zac Efron, and this is probably one of the biggest roles of his career. As the oldest living Von Erich son, Kevin would debut in wrestling in 1976. Known for wrestling barefoot, Kevin would go on to make a substantial impact in the wrestling world, whether teaming up with his brothers to feud with the Fabulous Freebirds, or his long-standing feuds with Gentleman Chris Adams and Ric Flair. He established himself and his family when he won both the NWA Texas Tag Team titles and the NWA American Tag Team titles, while also being successful in singles competition, defeating Bruiser Brody for the NWA American Heavyweight title, all within his first year. Zac's portrayal of Kevin in the film is definitely more dramatic, but most of the story is accurate except for one tiny thing. In the film, Kevin is shown having 2 boys by the end of it, but in real life, Kevin has 4 children. He has 2 sons and 2 daughters. Kristen was born in 1981. Jillian was born in 1985. Kevin's first son was born in 1988, David Michael Ross. His second son, Kevin Marshall, was born in 1992. Kevin Von Erich is the only surviving brother of the second-generation Von Erich family. He has suffered a lot, and he has hit some pretty dark times after all of it. He explains in his interview for Dark Side of the Ring, there was a moment in his life where he wanted to do something, but a fan's intervention steered him away from a bad choice.
And there was a time I thought that I wanted to die, I wanted to be dead. And I knew I wanted to kill myself. I said, love you, Kev. Oh, man. I went out to my car, and I just thought about the magnitude of what just happened. And I came in back in that store, gave him his rifle and hugged him. I said, I love you too, sir.
Doris divorces Fritz Von Erich in 1992. She could not overcome all of the loss she had experienced and blamed Fritz for the death of all of her children. She lived happily in Hawaii, where she passed away in 2015. Fritz Von Erich would pass away in 1997 from a diagnosis of both brain and lung cancer. Kevin sold the WCCW archives to the WWE in 2006. He was the only standing member to represent the Von Erichs during their induction into the WWE Hall of Fame at WrestleMania 25 in 2009. However, the story of the Von Erichs in wrestling does not stop there. Kerry's daughter Lacey would join the legacy of the Von Erichs in 2007, joining the TNA roster, though she would retire in 2010. In 2012, both of Kevin's sons would debut in wrestling under the name Ross and Marshall Von Erich as a tag team, following the footsteps of their late uncles. They have worked in promotions including MLW, TNA, and ROH. The story ends with Kevin looking on as his boys play, and it reminds him of his brothers and how connected they were. A sad realization to a tragic story, even with all of the other details left out. But it does beg the question, why leave out so many details? The drug abuse, the marriages, the further turmoil that seemed to follow this family for 30 years? Perhaps it was to save some face to the real-life events and the people it has affected. For example, David's wife, Patricia, had one interview after his death where she thanked the fans for their support, and then she backed away from the public eye completely and has not been seen since. This could be the reason her story is not mentioned. This family history is so tragic that it begs the question of whether or not doing a movie of this nature would truly capture it at all. To be frank, it does a really good job, even with everything that was left out. These are pieces of history that are harder to read about for someone like me, let alone any diehard fan. And to expose an audience to every little detail might not be all that necessary. But I am not the first to speak on the Von Erichs, nor will I be the last. This family has lamented themselves in wrestling history, and after a spectacular movie such as this, their story will reach more people who don't know what the Von Erich curse is. People who will watch this movie and look for information, find videos like this one, or videos from other channels. Then they'll find news articles, archives, discover other interviews, all on their own, really reading and discovering what the real tragedy of this family was. The Von Erich curse has seemingly lifted, as the third generation with Kevin at the helm has led to 13 grandchildren to start the fourth generation Von Erichs. Who knows what it was that held this family in a state of constant tragedy? Perhaps the father, the architect of the Von Erich name, is the sole holder of the curse. It wasn't the family itself, but it was him, and tragedy would follow him for the rest of his life. The film depicts this numerous times. In the hospital after Mike's accident.
But it keeps happening. It's taken over.
It was a terrible accident. Nothing more.
You shouldn't have even been in the ring.
It is not your fault. If you want to blame someone, you blame your father. But it is not your fault.
When Kevin confronts him after he discovers Kerry's body.
I told you to look out for him! You didn't take care of him! You didn't take care of any of them! He called you, and you didn't help him!
The Von Erich curse is Fritz Von Erich. The father who pushed his family into wrestling, drove them to compete at the levels he deemed worthy. Since his passing, nothing as tragic has affected the Von Erichs as it did with 5 of the 6 brothers. Kevin, however, disproves this notion, stating the movie took creative liberties with the depiction of their father. Quote, "I'll tell you my dad was a great man. I loved him so much. He was an honorable, good man. I want everyone to know he comes off pretty rank in this movie. You would think that the pressure that Fritz put on us is why my brothers would commit suicide. It was a hopeless feeling inside to let everyone down, and you just feel like dirt. All of my brothers were super loyal, and that's what it was. The shame and guilt of failing. It was not my dad." You could draw to the conclusion that this mindset was embedded by the father. This sense of pride and loyalty and the unwillingness to accept failure, accompanied by the shame of feeling like you did fail. That is something taught, not something you are born with. That is what this film portrays. Is it right? The answer to that question is up to perception. The family is thriving, and the Von Erich legacy, no matter how dire their history, will still live on. The Iron Claw is one piece of this history, and one piece alone. Kevin Von Erich asked that one thing remain true regarding the film's making. In a conversation with Durkin, Kevin stated, "The thing I care about most is that people know how much my brothers and I loved each other." That is the piece the Iron Claw gives to the Von Erich family legacy, and it's the only piece that matters.